it might be time to start to reassess the terms we use to describe what we're watching. So when I started at Heritage, the presumption was, and this is a very Anglo-American assumption, that the debates we're having are kind of rational debates about the way to get to mutually agreed upon outcomes. I don't think that's what we're watching now at all. I don't think we're watching a debate over how to get to the best outcome. I'm just saying this as an observer of what's going on. There is no way to assess, say, the transgenderist movement with that mindset. Policy papers don't account for it at all.
Do you want to tell everyone if you're a boy or a girl?
No, that's a theological phenomenon. And that's kind of the point I'm making. None of this makes sense in conventional political terms.
Where do you think this regression, if you agree with my use of it, where does that come from?
There's an intellectual movement in the social sciences that says that everything is a social construct. Yeah. And male and female is a social construct. There's no real validity to the difference between male and female. It's all a social construct.
Postmodernism. This is where Jordan Peterson makes me want to like throw chairs when he talks about this. Comes out of French philosophy in the 1960s and 70s and 80s. Michel Foucault is the most famous example of a French postmodernist. The central argument that was made by Foucault and postmodernists was that there is no natural essence to anything, that everything is a social construct. So the trans movement, for instance, right, that started from postmodernism. It has become the dominant way of thinking in academia, and I have to say, in my view, it is the supreme achievement of academics ever.
You need to understand postmodernism because that's what you're up against, and you're up against it far more than you know or think. And it's a much more well-developed and pervasive, pernicious, nihilistic, intellectually attractive doctrine than has yet come to public realization. It absolutely dominates the humanities and increasingly the social sciences in the universities.
So with postmodernism, I feel like it's kind of the water that we're swimming in a way, and it's sort of hard to undergird a lot of our defenses of Western culture, considering that we have this sort of postmodern thinking where everything's relative.
Or cultural relativism, the idea that different cultures have completely different ways of classifying the world, and so it's just our white Western way of looking at things that says that there's a divide between males and females, or something like that.
Do you think that this is a religious belief, Richard?
I think it has a lot in common with religious belief. It's different in that it doesn't invoke anything supernatural, but it's very similar in the ways that heretics are hunted down. I think we see that in the collective guilt that all white people are supposed to inherit because of slavery, even if they have no direct connection with slavery. We are all collectively guilty for what people of our type did in some past age, and that is original sin. It's exactly like original sin.
What I say is that the 1619 Project was a classic postmodernist reversal where you start out thinking like, oh, you thought this country was founded on the ideals of freedom. Actually, it was founded, much earlier on the ideal of, slavery and enslaving people. My critique of critical race theory is the way it uses power. I think it uses power, the concept of power in a regressive way, in a way that sort of that bars a multiracial coalition from forming around material issues rather than creating one.
Another major postmodern argument says that in the social construction of things, there are hidden dynamics of power everywhere, and they see it as their job to give us the tools to unmask those dynamics so that people can see them plainly.
And so for the postmodernists, the world is a Hobbesian battleground of identity groups. They do not communicate with one another because they can't. All there is a struggle for power. And if you're in the predator group, which means you're an oppressor, then you better look out because you're not exactly welcome, and neither are your ideas.
And so this is actually one of the hallmarks of a religion is people are committed to something that's obviously not true on its face. And the people who are really committed to this religion, that everything is power, this sort of Michel Foucault religion, they even interpret family life as being about power. That my relationships with my kids is primarily about my power. I mean, that's just bizarre.
And marriage.
Yeah, that's right, because I'm a man and my wife's a woman. Therefore, I must be motivated to have power over my wife, and I must feel something in common with other men because we're all men. We're all trying to maintain the power structure. I mean, this is far wackier than saying there was this guy and he was killed and he came back to life 3 days later. I mean, this is just a matter of faith.
Within the religion that I'm talking about, the cardinal point is that you show that you know that racism exists. Just that you know that it exists. Now, what you're going to do about it is irrelevant. Whether or not what you're showing actually is racism is irrelevant. Whenever you see these sorts of things happening and you see brilliant people making arguments that don't make any sense and utterly despising those who disagree with them as if they were heretics, word chosen deliberately, it's because what we're seeing, even though these are people who are usually very secular in their self-conception, it's a religion. This is exactly the kind of person who sent Galileo into exile a very, very long time ago. And the people back then often didn't think of themselves as religious. It was just considered truth. We're faced with that same kind of thought, even if the word isn't applied.
The sense that I come away with, though, is that Lyotard's reason for adopting postmodernism and post-structuralism is something like Edmund Hillary's for climbing Mount Everest, because it was there. If you know that movie by Marlon Brando where he's playing a motorcycle hood, and he comes in and somebody asks him, what are you rebelling against? And Marlon Brando says, what do you got? Well, that's pretty much what postmodernism is. What are you rebelling against? Well, what's here? We're rebelling against that. We're opposed to it. Why? There it is. What sense does this make? We find ourselves really interesting, and we want to invent new discourses. And look, we have to get tenure somehow. We got to write books. So let's be against things. That's what postmodernism amounts to. It's a posture of studied suspicion, a posture of exaggerated logical or intellectual scrupulosity, and the result of this scrupulosity is not intellectual cleanliness, it is intellectual sterility.